Now the Zenfone 8, for me at least, was one of the biggest smartphone disappointments of last year because I got tiny little goblin hands. I really love a compact blower, but that thing, the battery life was awful. It really heated up pretty bad. Like if you used it for a while then slipped it back in your shorts, that thing would toast your marshmallows in no time. But Asus is back, baby, with the Zenfone 9, fresh for 2022, and you still got that compact form factor, but now the coolant setup has increased in size 230%, the camera sensor's been upgraded, the battery is bigger as well, despite the fact you've got that lovely dinky chassis. And somehow Asus has crammed the fresh new Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset into this dinky little frame as well. It seems to have been overhauled in pretty much every single area, proper flagship blower, and it'll cost you €799. Now, I've been using the Zenfone 9 as my full-time blower for over a week now, so here's my in-depth thoughts on the cameras, the gaming performance, the battery life, all that good stuff. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke, subscribe, and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So first up, the unboxing segment, and for this I'll actually have to bung it back in the box temporarily. The box itself, very understated, nothing particularly thrilling there. And inside we have, hey, one Asus Zenfone 9, what a surprise. You've got the weeniest little pokey pin device I've ever seen in my life. I'm going to lose that in seconds, guaranteed. Got a big old brick of a charger. USB Type-C charging cable, and you've also got a protective cover bundled in the box as well, and it's not your typical condom case, it is actually a hard shell cover. And this seems to not only match the chosen colour of the Zenfone 9, but it's also got some of the same stylings on the back there as well, so it doesn't completely cover up the little bits of frill and flare. And there you have it, that was everything in the Asus Zenfone 9 box, so now let's check out the actual blower. So first up, unsurprisingly, absolutely adore the design of the Zenfone 9. This thing is just so beautifully tiny. It's once again a 5.9 inches, so it just fits beautifully in the hand. One-handed use is actually surprisingly easy. You can stretch all the way up to the top end of that display, no worries. And as you can see there, the bezel surrounding that display, a little bit chunky up towards the top and the bottom, but nothing horrendous, certainly more than compact enough to satisfy. As you might expect, the Zenfone 9 is a fairly chunky monkey, which is understandable. The rest of the dimensions are quite weeny, and you've still got to fit a battery and all the other good stuff in there. But it still feels less thick than a Nothing phone or an iPhone, so they've done a really good job here. And that's probably helped by the fact that the back cover kind of tapers away from those flat edges, so you do get a slightly curved finish. Flip it around to the arse end, and it's not glass here on the back. Asus actually described it as polymer, which of course really isn't saying much of anything. It's actually got a paper-like texture, more of a paper-like texture than those Realme GT phones. And I've got to say, I really do like the look of this phone. This is the sort of beigey model. You can also grab it in black, blue, and red. I've got to say those punchier colours are very lovely indeed. But if you do fancy something a bit more understated, well, this is definitely the one to go for. And as you can see there, Asus has actually added little bits of style and some text, some fonts here and there, just to sort of freshen up the design a bit. Because let's face it, the Zenfone 8 was a bit bland and dull. And the good news is that matte textured finish not only helps with grip, but it also seems to be really good at repelling finger grease and other nasty scuffy marks. Grime, dust, none of that stuff shows up on this arse end here. Certainly one of the only criticisms I have, if you're going to chuck some bad words at the Zenfone 9, is that those camera lenses do jut quite far out of the back. So then you've got the old wobbly phone scenario if it's lying prone on a desk and you're trying to actually do something on it. And the Zenfone 9 is pretty bloody hardy as well. You've got Gorilla Glass Victus up front, which so far, touch wood, hasn't scratched up at all, which is good because they haven't put a pre-installed screen protector on there. And it's also IP68 water and dust resistant, so you can drop it in a bubbly bath, a jacuzzi, whatever, just yank it out again, towel it off, it'll be absolutely fine. So that design gets a big thumbs up from me. It's still pleasingly dinky like last year's Zenfone 8, but the aesthetics have been dramatically improved. Anyway, let's stop ogling the bloody thing and check out the software, and in this case it is Android 12 with ZenUI slapped on top, which is so light that it is basically almost stock Android. So for one, thankfully Asus hasn't chucked a whole bunch of crapware onto the Zenfone 9, so you won't have to spend ages uninstalling a whole bunch of bollocks, just the likes of Instagram and a couple of others. And they haven't messed around with the general UI. Everything is exactly where you'd expect it to be, all the notifications, toggles, all that good stuff. And Asus is promising you 2 major OS updates, so it'll get Android 13 and 14 beyond that, and at least 2 years of security updates as well. So not as good as some rivals like OnePlus, for instance, but not bad either. Dive into the settings menu and it's precisely what you would expect, again, from a sort of stock Android style setup. So for instance, go into wallpaper and style, and you can quickly change up your desktops and get some color scheming to match. It's got that fantastic privacy dashboard, really useful stuff. Then Asus has added a few extra bonus bits which are generally quite worthy. courtesy of ZenUI. So for instance, you've got the Game Genie mode, which is definitely worth banging on about later. I'll touch on that in the performance section. You've got the twin apps if you want to, for instance, set up 2 different accounts on the same app. And if there's some apps that you use constantly throughout the day, just add them to OptiFlex. They do actually get added by default as well when the Zenfone picks up on the fact that they are your most popular ones. And with this, they'll pop up a bit faster in general. You're not constantly looking at a loading screen. And Asus really is a friend to the stubby-fingered person because they've also added in a one-handed mode if you're still struggling to reach all the way up there to the top end of the screen. I say they've added it in, to be honest, it looks exactly like the one you get on the Pixel phone, so it might just be a part of stock Android. So over here on the right edge of the Zenfone 9 is the power button, a very skinny power button, which also doubles up as a fingerprint sensor, and it is so good. Absolutely puts the Pixel efforts to shame. Certainly the Pixel 6 and the 6 Pro instantly recognize straight in, and even when my hands are quite moist, it tends to still work, generally after just 1 or 2 taps. And it also supports a couple of quick gestures as well. So for instance, you've got the quick access feature, which when turned on, this allows you to quickly swipe down that notifications bar. And it certainly works as intended, but I did find myself accidentally activating it quite a lot. And to be honest, you can drag down that notifications bar from anywhere on screen anyway, so it's kind of superfluous to requirements. Like on any other massive phone, it would probably be a great feature, but here on the compact Zenfone 9, it's really not needed. And if you want, you can actually rebind the quick access swipe gesture to a couple of other different options, such as, for instance, refreshing a web page or an app that you're in. Got some media controls there as well, but as I say, I was accidentally activating it, so I just left it switched off. What is more useful is the ability to open any app with a double tap of that power key, which I've assigned, as you can see there, to the camera. And another pretty cool feature is the back double tap, which when you switch this on, you can have it perform a variety of functions again. You can take a screenshot, open the camera, turn on the flashlight, etc. I've got that double tap feature assigned to the torch, which isn't quite as satisfying as Motorola's double karate chop, but it certainly does the job. Occasionally you will have to give it a couple of double taps to actually get it to work. It doesn't quite register perfectly every time, but you kind of get used to it. And I forgot to mention earlier when I was banging on about the fingerprint sensor, you do actually get face recognition on the Zenfone 9 as well. I haven't actually bothered to set this up because the fingerprint sensor is so bloody good. And then as for your storage, you've got up to 256 gigs of UFS 3.1 space shoved onto there. No microSD expandability, sadly, boo hiss. All you got space for in that SIM tray is 2 SIMs, as you can see there, no microSD memory card slots, but to be honest, that's pretty much one of the only features the Zenfone 9 doesn't have. Now that display tech is very similar to last year's model. The Zenfone 9 sports a 5.9-inch Samsung AMOLED panel, Full HD Plus resolution, so nice and crisp, especially considering how dinky this panel is compared with a lot of rivals. You got the nice deep blacks, the sharp contrast, HDR10 plus streaming support on this bad boy as well, and nice poppy colors as well. We've got accurate colors. The Delta E color accuracy tuning is in full effect here. Jump on into the display settings and you can mess around with the color output. You've got all kinds of different presets here. As with all OLEDs, the viewing angles are nice and wide as well, so no worries if you want to get a couple of mates round and all cram your heads together and watch a bit of Netflix or Disney+. And the brightness levels are sound as a pound as well. On that top brightness level, I had no problem seeing what was going on outdoors, even when wearing shades. The auto brightness does the job nicely as well, and the Zenfone 9 tops off at a 120Hz refresh rate, like a lot of rivals. And as you can see there, it's dynamic scaling between 60 and 120Hz. Otherwise, you can also manually choose one of 3 settings. Doesn't appear to be LTPO tech, however. And when you go full screen, that selfie cam orifice is reasonably dinky and wedged away in a corner, so it doesn't really get in the way. And like most mobiles these days, you do have a stereo speaker setup as well, but is it any good? Let's find out. Boasting those same tensor smarts as the Pixel 6 flagship, but in a more compact 6.1-inch form factor. And while the Zenfone 9 speakers aren't the loudest around, they certainly pop out some decent quality audio when you rack it up to that maximum volume. The bottom speaker is more powerful than the top speaker as usual, but not to some ridiculously imbalanced degree. It's only really when you muffle that one that you can sort of really tell the difference. And you know what, Asus? I friggin' ruddy love you forever, mate, because oh my god, you've got a headphone jack here on the Zenfone 9. This thing actually has a bloody headphone jack. What? And of course, you've got full Bluetooth connectivity as well. And when you pair up with a compatible headset, you've got a good bit of Qualcomm aptX adaptive support. We've also got aptX lossless on here, all of those Snapdragon sound smarts, high-res audio support, and Dirac audio tuning as well. And as you can see, this is set to dynamic by default, which just changes up the audio settings based on what you're actually up to, but you do have a full-on equalizer and various other presets you can play with. plus some dedicated support for Asus's own ROG headphones and headsets. So anyway, let's merrily skip our way from the media smarts onto the performance, and the Asus Zenfone 9 is powered by Qualcomm's latest Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset, backed by up to 16 gigs of DDR5 RAM. Yeah, you heard me right, 16 gigs they've packed into this dinky little bugger, and I've got to say the everyday performance absolutely flawless, no judders or stumbles or whatever, helped along close by the fast refresh, just makes everything feel slick and smooth. And if you're a gamer, well, you might be more swayed potentially by Asus's ROG phones, which are dedicated gaming devices, but the Zenfone 9, despite its miniature size, is actually a really good gaming phone too. That perfectly flat display is supremely responsive to all of your touches, your pokes, your swipes, your prods, whatever else. And that Snapdragon chipset just keeps things flowing beautifully. It's like a Call of Duty Mobile and everything, absolutely no worries whatsoever. Even on the maximum detail settings and the frame rate, you get a, again, flawless experience. And even when I really tested this thing, really pushed its buttons with a good bit of Genshin Impact on the maxed out detail settings at 60 frames per second. Again, so a couple of tiny little stumbles in the frame rate here and there, but very, very, very rare to see, and it was just buttery smooth for the rest of the time. Asus has thankfully improved the coolant tech over the previous generations, so now you've got a full-on vapor chamber rather than just a simple heat pipe, as well as bigger graphite sheets and all of that shenanigans. And after I'd spent a good bit of time doing some Genshin Impacts, the top end of the Zenfone 9 was starting to get quite toasty, very warm to the touch indeed. Oh, just accidentally turned on the torch again, bugger off. And now I've looked directly at the torch, and now all I can see is bright flashing lights. Fantastic. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, it starts to heat up a bit, but thankfully it doesn't seem to actually throttle the phone at all when you are gaming. The performance remains smooth and stable. The only other time I noticed the Zenfone 9 getting hot over the past sort of week or so was when I was downloading a lot of files, leaving that screen on for a good couple of hours when I was first setting it up. Then it started to get quite warm again, but again, didn't seem to impact anything on the actual device itself. And gamers will also love the fantastic Game Genie tools that Asus has packed in here, which is very similar to what you'll get on the actual ROG phone gaming handsets. This includes loads of stuff like, for instance, the ability to block all your notifications, all the standard things like that, record the actual action. You can also get real-time information up on the actual frame rate and everything in your game, so you can see what's going on there. You can bring up a crosshair on screen as well if you need a little bit of help with your shooty game action. And you've also got a variety of performance modes as well. So you've got the usual eco modes if you're just playing something simple like Wordle, for instance. You don't want to cane that battery life. Otherwise, if you are playing something more demanding like Genshin Impact, you can stick it on the high performance mode. As for battery life, well, Asus has increased it over the previous generation. You've now got a 4,300 mAh capacity cell stuffed inside of that dinky frame. And during the pre-brief, Asus was really bringing on the smack talk as well, saying that this thing could outlast the Xiaomi 12 and the Snapdragon Galaxy S22 as well. And you know what? They're bloody right, because the battery life on this thing is phenomenal. Like seriously, most days I stagger into bed and I've still got about 30-35% charge left in this thing. And it's not like I've been taking it easy on it either. I've been doing everything on this thing. I've been smashing the camera use, I've been doing lots of gaming, lots of media streaming, audio as well as video, using it for navigation, usually at least 6 to 7 hours of screen on time a day. Like today, for instance, just this morning shooting this video, the screen on time has been 2 hours and 15 minutes so far. I've been, doing a little bit of YouTube and some Deezer and some other bits like that as well. And it's still on 83 frickin' %. 83! It's bloody mental. And the charging ain't particularly nippy, but you do have all of the usual adaptive charging support and everything as well, and sadly no wireless charging support. And yeah, the fact that it doesn't support wireless charging is a bit of a shame, because that's one of the few features that the Zenfone 9 doesn't support that a lot of rivals do. But it's got the headphone jack, so yes! And last up for this mega Asus Zenfone 9 unboxing and review and everything else you need to know, let's take a squint at the camera tech. And this is another reason I like the Zenfone. Asus hasn't fannied about slapping lots of random pointless lenses on there. And the primary sensor is Sony's good old reliable 50 megapixel IMX766 sensor, but it's been proper jazzed up with a bit of 6-axis hybrid gimbal stabilization. And by the way, 6-axis hybrid gimbal stabilization is an impressively difficult phrase to say. I ballsed that up about 5 times before I finally bloody got it right. And if you look real close, you can actually see that lens moving inside the housing to deal with any sort of little shakes and tremors as well, which is pretty wild. So just like Vivo's phones, this is very good at countering little hand tremors and motions and movements as well, which is particularly good when you're shooting in low light and that shutter remains open just a little bit longer. That camera UI is very easy to get on with. You've got all of your modes down here at the bottom, which you can swipe through like so. And then just a quick swipe down from any point brings up some of the camera options. So again, very easy to fiddle about with one-handed. And of course you can swap also to the alternative 12 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter with a quick tap like so. And here's some samples that I snapped with that Zenfone 9 camera over the past week or so, and like all other smartphones rocking the IMX766, very dependable across a range of conditions. This phone can handle HDR type situations with strong contrast, no worries whatsoever. In a more ambient light as well, it does a pretty good job, even with a slightly moving subject. Obviously if you get something that's bouncing around all over the place, it's gonna come out blurry. You've definitely got more natural color reproduction than something like a Samsung, which tends to boost the hues a little bit to make things maybe a bit more eye-catching and eye-pleasing, potentially, depending on your own particular tastes, I guess. And when it comes to very low light shots, you do have a night mode on hand as well, which can help to brighten things up a bit, again helped by that excellent stabilization. However, at night the focus will struggle if things are really dark, so just bear in mind you'll probably get really fuzzy, blurry, out of focus results. The 12 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter uses Sony's IMX363 sensor, and yeah, you don't get the same accurate looking colors, and it's not quite as good in low light conditions, but it's there if you want a different viewpoint. Sadly, no, there is no telephoto lens here on the Zenfone 9, again something that a lot of rivals do offer, but Asus said it was a case of compromise. To get a phone this small with a bigger battery, bigger cooling tech and all of that good stuff, they had to slash it. While the telephoto lens is a nice to have, definitely great for getting unobtrusive shots of, your family, your pets, whatever, it's not an essential, that's for sure. As I mentioned before, lots of different bonus camera modes to play around with, including, if you dodge into the more section, you've got a full-on pro mode, so you can mess around with the autofocus, the shutter speed, the ISO levels, white balance. Plenty of options there to tinker around with, although there doesn't seem to be any RAW support. And if you flick across to the video section, you can shoot footage at HD, Full HD or 4K resolution at 30 or 60 frames per second, or you can bump all the way up to 8K resolution at 24 frames per second. And video shot on the Zenfone 9 again looks bloody lovely, especially again with that stabilization in play. You can move and shoot as merrily as you like, and it generally comes out really nice and smooth. Even at that 8K resolution, I was really impressed. It's a lot smoother, a lot less janky than what you'll get with some rival phones. However, in all of my captured footage, the color temperature was far too warm. Those colors were very, very poppy and bright and just artificially so though, so not natural looking at all. It's a problem I've seen on some other IMX766 phones, such as the Nothing phone. Hopefully it'll be tweaked in an update. And then swap around to the front-facing selfie camera. You've got a 12 megapixel Sony IMX663 sensor in there with autofocus, as you can see there. And if you are an Instagram fan, this will again do the job day or night, absolutely no worries whatsoever. Capture your mug with plenty of detail. You've got the portrait mode, smarts, all that good stuff. And using that front-facing camera, you can also shoot up to 4K resolution footage, this time just at 30 frames per second. I've noticed the audio pickup isn't quite as strong as a lot of other smartphones. It can be quite quiet, unfortunately, but the picture quality, again, pretty decent. Can generally deal with HDR style situations, etc. So that right there, in a full-on pretty comprehensive nutshell, is the Asus Zenfone 9. And I've got to say, after using it as my full-time smartphone for a week now, I am absolutely in love with this thing. It is definitely right up there with the Xiaomi 12, maybe even a little bit better. Considering the size of this thing, it's incredible what Asus has managed to cram inside of it. The battery life is a massive improvement over last year. Can get a little bit toasty if you're using the camera a lot, if you're doing a lot of gaming on it, but not to a detrimental effect. The performance is as good as any other smartphone out there right now. The media chops are wonderful. You've actually got that headphone jack up there. Just a couple of little things that sort of take away from the overall experience. The lack of wireless charging, the fact you don't have a telephoto shooter on there, but it does everything else so well that I'm willing to forgive it these minor flaws. So anyway, that's what this baldy northerner reckons. What do you guys reckon? Are you tempted by the Asus Zenfone 9? Be great to hear your thoughts down below. Please do stay tuned. I'm hoping to do a full side-by-side comparison with that Xiaomi 12 and also the Pixel 6a, which is another beautifully compact smartphone which packs some serious smarts. For more on the latest and greatest tech, please do plug subscribe, ding that notifications bell, and have yourselves a bloody wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone. Love you.